talk into this, even though you guys can't hear me. What? What? They're always my favorite. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for coming tonight. We're really excited to have you here. And I'm Rebecca Kirstein, and I'm one of the co-founders of ReThink Thinking. Tom Hudock is also here with me, which I'll introduce you to him a little bit later. But we actually want to start the evening by bringing up Morgan Reed, who is somewhere. Where's Morgan? Oh, there he is. We're actually going to bring him up for our territory acknowledgement. And Morgan is part of our core education team with ReThink Thinking. And he's going to start us off with that. And then I'll come back up here and be brief. Not you, me.
We respectfully acknowledge that Sunset Labs is located on the unceded Coast Salish territory of the Lekwungen and Wasanich peoples, and we thank them for allowing us to meet here tonight.
That was brief. You're back up here with me, Tom. Come on over. Yay! Co-founders of ReThink Thinking, and this is my co-founder, Tom Hudock. And we just wanted to give you guys a little bit of background because we recognize that not everyone here tonight necessarily knows who our nonprofit ReThink Thinking, which is actually dedicated to providing opportunities for youth to explore inquiry-based learning through a variety of different ways. We actually started in 2016 with the summit, which was for grade 9 to 12 students. It's coming up again in April, very soon. We started with 250 kids back in 2016. And what we saw from that event was an incredibly rich experience for young people to really explore what they care about, what they're excited about, why they get up in the morning, to collaborate with others on the things that they care about, and really explore deeply the kind of learning that we're talking about here that is really driven by their passions and what they're excited about. So that all started in 2016, and fast forward, here we are tonight, and I'll let Tom tell you about some of the other things that we've been up to over the last couple of years.
Yeah, thank you. So for a few more things we've done a Pro D Day last year, and we had 150 teachers from all over BC come, and we had Jeff Hopkins and his crew come by and teach a lot of the teachers about bringing inquiry, like the real inquiry model, into the classroom, and a Global Explorers program. And so what this program is going to be is for international students to come in. They're going to spend 3 weeks in Victoria, up in the Royal Roads and Pearson College, and they're going to learn English through the inquiry model and project-based learning model. And so that'll be quite an experience for them as well. And but we're really not here for that today. We're actually here for a couple other things. And one of them is about the fabulous panelists that we have coming up here shortly. And these 4 panelists are experts in their field. They are doing amazing things. And just to be able to have them all here at the same table is a pretty lucky evening for us. So we're pretty happy about that. And the second thing is an announcement that we are opening up the second inquiry school here in Victoria, and it's going to be happening this fall. And so that's a pretty exciting announcement for us. Thank you.
Yes. And second to that, we are launching our crowdfund campaign this evening. So we are going to be launching that very, very shortly here. And raising $220,000 to open the next inquiry school. Woo! We hear whoops from the audience. Whoop 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 whoop. And we're excited that you're all here to talk about the future of education, to support these kinds of initiatives. So what better platform than to launch this out into the world and to get feedback from all of you and to get everyone excited about the future of education for our kids. So thanks for being here. And with that, I think we're going to queue up a video, right? It's that time already. That is the time. It's always about waiting for Jason. Don't worry, I brought my jazz hands. No? Nice jazz hands. Thank you. Thank you very much. I like this guy in the front row. He gets my jokes. He likes my jazz hands. He stole reserved seating. We don't even know how he got in here. There you go. She's in. going to be showing that obviously on the live stream, but here we can all watch the screen. Just for fun.
As parents, there are two things we want for our children above all else. First, we want them to be well, happy, fulfilled, and generally excited about life. Second, we want them to be able, to be well-positioned and well-adjusted to navigate our ever-evolving world. So, every day we put millions of young people onto buses like this one, bound for buildings filled with desks and chairs where bells govern a tight schedule. Here, they will listen to teachers and write tests to satisfy a government curriculum that still measures the same sorts of skills as it did in the 1800s. The world is changing at a pace that few of us can predict. This often results in anxiety and concern, knowing we're sending our children into the future to work jobs that haven't yet been invented for organizations that don't yet exist. Thought leaders from around the world are devising new models of education to better prepare children for the future and to foster their unique talents. One effective model that's quickly rising to the surface allows for students to explore what matters to them and to learn in a personalized fashion.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and this is Tom, and we're ReThink Thinking. As parents ourselves, we share many of the same concerns that you do, which is why we're asking for your support in raising $220,000 to launch the next leading-edge middle school right here in Victoria, BC this fall.
And while we're at it, a completely modular system so that we can support others doing the same in their own communities. The education model that we're so excited about is called Inquiry Learning.
What's different about the inquiry model is that we go beyond just the research project with a presentation at the end. We're actually taking people through very deeper learning activities to get at the heart of why they're passionate about a topic or an area of interest, and they discover or create their own knowledge.
The inquiry-based education model focuses on strengths, not weaknesses, competencies, not curriculum, and personal growth, not test scores. There are no teachers and no students, only learners.
I feel very confident about our daughter's future. She's really learning how to develop as a human being, and she's learning about things that really interest her.
My daughter has thrived in the community she belongs to now. She's allowed to
work on what I want. I'm still completing the curriculum, but it also means I can go more in depth in some subjects.
It's a great learning environment, and the inquiry model specifically is you do what you love what you do. You do projects and inquiries on whatever your interest is, and in many cases that leads people to their future jobs.
I personally didn't really get anything done in the public school education system, and I found that being here, I really sort of found this motivation that I didn't really know I had.
The inquiry learning model sees students graduating high school with the same accreditation they would receive at any other school, and more importantly, with pivotal 21st century competencies like fluid communication skills, initiative, confidence, and a clear sense of purpose.
I feel like what we know how it's going to unfold next. We would rather have people learning how to think, how to analyze a situation and make a decision, rather than learning a recipe using ingredients that might not exist in 5 years or 10 years.
If you're curious and want to know more, we're holding frequent parent information sessions. And for details, check out the links below.
I hope we've conveyed why we're so committed to expanding inquiry learning, and that you're as excited about this new school as we are. Thank you for your interest in our vision and for joining us as we rethink thinking.
And exploring what matters to her and being really, really engaged in learning. And I think that's what we all want for our kids, is for them to be engaged in their own lives and to be excited about going to school every day and what they're going to do in the world and how they're going to contribute. And as a parent, the fact that I get to have that feeling for my own child is a gift. And I want every parent to feel that way and to know that their kids are going to be okay. So that's really the personal behind why we're involved in this. Yeah.
Maybe you want to talk a little bit about
Jazz
the
hands.
summit.
You guys will get a little, you'll get a little card when you're going out, but the summit really is an opportunity for kids all over Victoria. All over Victoria to be able to really have an opportunity to explore this kind of learning, regardless of where they go to school, whether they're homeschooled or in private school or public school. It's an opportunity for them to come together and explore this kind of learning model in a really fun event style weekend, and it really gives them a taste of what this kind of learning looks like and what it looks like to really explore what they're passionate about, and to find other people that care about what they care about, and to work together towards achieving goals that they're excited about. So that's really what the summit is. Are we getting the signal? No, we're not. Oh, we are. Oh, we're getting the signal. We got the signal. Woohoo! All right. So I'm going to stop talking, and we're going to watch a video, and off we go. It always works really well in the test run.
As parents, there are two things we want for our children above all else. First, we want them to be well, happy, fulfilled, and generally excited about life. Second, we want them to be able to be well-positioned and well-adjusted to navigate our ever-evolving world. So, every day we put millions of young people onto buses like this one, bound for buildings filled with desks and chairs where bells govern a tight schedule. Here, they will listen to teachers and write tests. As parents, there are two things that still measures the same sorts of skills as it did in the 1800s. The world is changing at a pace that few of us can predict, but that all of us can feel. For those of us who are parents, this often results in anxiety and concern, knowing we're sending our children into the future to work jobs that haven't yet been invented for organizations that don't yet exist. Thought leaders from around the world are devising new models of education to better prepare children for the future and to foster their unique talents. One effective model that's quickly rising to the surface allows for students to explore what matters to them and to learn in a personalized fashion.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and this is Tom, and we're ReThink Thinking. As parents ourselves, we share many of the same concerns that you do, which is why we're asking for your support in raising $220,000 to launch the next leading-edge middle school right here in Victoria, BC this fall.
And we'll add a completely modular system so that we can support others doing the same in their own communities. The education model that we're so excited about is called inquiry learning.
What's different about the inquiry model is that we go beyond just the research project with a presentation at the end. We're actually taking people through very deeper learning activities to get at the heart of why they're passionate about a topic or an area of interest, and they discover or create their own knowledge.
The inquiry-based education model focuses on strengths, not weaknesses, competencies, not curriculum, and personal growth, not test scores. There are no teachers and no students, only learners.
I feel very confident about our daughter's future. She's really learning how to develop as a human being, and she's learning about things that really interest her.
My daughter has thrived in community she belongs to now. She's allowed to be fully herself.
Well, inquiry learning means I have the freedom to work on what I want. I'm still completing the curriculum, but it also means I can go more in depth in some subjects.
It's a great learning environment. And the inquiry model specifically is you do what you love what you do. You do projects and inquiries on whatever your interest is. And in many cases that leads people to their future jobs.
I personally didn't really get anything done in the public school education system. I found that being here, I really sort of found this motivation that I didn't really know I had.
The inquiry learning model sees students graduating high school with the same accreditation they would receive at any other school, and more importantly, with pivotal 21st century competencies like fluid communication skills, initiative, confidence, and a clear sense of purpose.
I feel like what we're doing is the perfect way to prepare people for a world that we really don't know how it's going to unfold next. We would rather have people learning how to think, how to analyze a situation, make a decision, rather than learning a recipe, using ingredients that might not exist in 5 years or 10 years.
If you're curious and want to know more, we're holding frequent parent information sessions. And for details, check out the links below.
I hope we've conveyed why we're so committed to expanding
So thanks for watching and being here tonight as we launch this out into the world. So as you've seen, that's the next big thing is this Inquiry Middle School launching right here in Victoria this fall, and we're all pretty excited about the possibilities and the amazing people that are coming to the table, parents and educators and people who really want to see this move forward. So we're really excited to launch it out into the world, and with that, the conversation around the future of education and what's important in this conversation is really up to the professionals who are on our panel. So I had to write this down because there's no way I could remember the lovely accolades of Catherine McGregor, who is here, who I'm going to invite up as our panel moderator. So she is a lifelong learner, researcher, and educator, and her current position as Associate Dean of the Faculty of Education at the University of Victoria gives her a platform from which to work collaboratively with policymakers, practitioners, and leaders in effecting change in educational and community settings. So we are very lucky to have her here tonight. She's a busy lady. And thank you so much for coming.
Okay, that's great. I'm going to introduce everyone else, yes? Is that the idea? Okay, that's good. So thank you, Rebecca and Tom, and it's a real pleasure to be here tonight. This is, for me, a second in a series of conversations around education, and we're being joined by some really great thought leaders. So I'm going to take a moment or two to introduce each one and then ask them to come up as I'm introducing them. Is that okay? Yeah? Okay, I think we've got a script. So why don't we start with Alison Reese. So Alison has been working with life seminars, living with families effectively. She writes the material, she presents it, she writes courses and articles and works with families and professionals, and has been doing this since 1991. So Life Seminars was originally created by Dr. Alison Miller in the 1980s. The Life Seminars also train psychologists and counselors to teach parenting courses in various mental health centers and organizations. So Dr. Miller and Alison together have published 2 books, Sidestepping the Power Struggle and The Parent-Child Connection. So welcome, Alison.
Thank you.
How about we'll have Lisa come up next, Lisa Tate. So Lisa works for Family Smart as a parent in residence, helping parents and caregivers navigate the mental health and school systems, finding resources in the community, and provides support to families whose children have mental health issues. Lisa has lived the experience helping her own 2 children overcome their own mental health challenges. So welcome, Lisa. And next is Dr. Jillian Roberts, one of my colleagues from the University of Victoria. Jillian is a renowned child psychologist, author, professor, and parent. She earned her PhD at 26. That's pretty remarkable, actually. And she was at one point one of the youngest associate professors at the University of Victoria at age 32, and then shortly after that became the associate dean. I inherited the job that I do from Jillian. She was just an amazing role model and an incredible leader. And Dr. Roberts is also the co-founder of an organization called Family Sparks. She offers families a supportive, resource-rich community to help them navigate our increasingly complicated world. So welcome, Jillian. And then there's Jeff Hopkins, certainly not last or least on our list. He actually is last, but definitely not least. So Jeff has been an educator for a really long time, but he's what I would call a thought leader as an educator. He left a very lucrative career in the public school system to take the risk to start his own school based on what he really believes in, the principles of inquiry-based learning and providing every learner with the incredible learning and rich learning opportunities that they deserve. And his school is just a remarkable place, and I hope he'll spend some time telling us a little bit more about it. So his school is called the Pacific School of Innovation and Inquiry, and it helps learners to transcend traditional high school subject silos through an interdisciplinary inquiry-based approach. And we heard Jeff describe some of his approaches to teaching and learning when the collaboration of learning in his school on the video. So welcome, Jeff. All right, so I have been reminded. Oh, good, that's great, thank you. I have been reminded that it's important to speak directly into the microphone. So, and every occasion when one of our speakers on the panel wants to say a word, even if you want to fight the microphone from someone else, you should make sure you grab and bring it up close so everyone can hear you. So, it seems a bit formal at this point, but I'm sure it's going to get a little more lively as we get going. Yeah. So I'm going to give them a question to get started. And really the question is, there's been this talk in the video and in the introductions that Tom and Rebecca has given us this evening about the need for schools to change. So can each one of our panelists tell me a little bit, tell our audience about why schools should change at all? So who wants to start with that provocative question? Schools don't really need to change, do they?
I'd be happy to start. You know, I've been teaching these parenting classes for 27 years, and I think I actually started teaching these classes because I wanted to have a level of expertise to get my own kids through the school system, quite frankly. I just think that how we talk to kids is incredibly important. I think that how we speak is how we exist as leaders. I think that our words can have a tremendous positive impact, and our words can also be devastating. I think it's really important to know who is in front of us as opposed to having a cookie cutter method to parent or educate kids. And, you know, I mean, I could go on for a while, but I think the big piece is that children, that we are looking at triggers that stop them from learning, that we are figuring out how to support them, and in order to do that, we really need to know them. And so, you know, I just think relationship with children is hugely important, so, yeah.
So someone want to build on Alison's answer?
Sure. I've been seeing children clinically for 20 years, and when I first started teaching, I noticed teaching and practicing psychology, I noticed certain things, and those things are changing. So I'm seeing far more children with far more serious challenges, far more cutting, far more suicidal ideation, children being glued to devices, parents being glued to devices, people not connecting over dinner. There's so many changes, and these changes that are happening are happening for parents who didn't live through these same experiences. So parents are being asked to help their children navigate social media and the pressures with being bullied online when they never had to encounter that themselves. So we're living in a different age, and we need to rethink the social constructs that support our children to ensure that they're able to be resilient and adapt to this new world. And school is an incredible opportunity to support children rather than make it more difficult and put up more obstacles for them.
Lisa, it looks like you're ready to add some more to that.
My mic in gear. Yes, I talk to a lot of parents whose children have mental health challenges, so I speak to them and hear their stories, and of course school is a very big stumbling block for getting someone to school and to get them through the lessons and homework and just navigating all these very difficult things that parents are being asked to do, especially when their kids have different challenges. Not always understood by schools, sometimes, thank you, yes they are, but not always. So it's a really, really big area that I am talking about quite often with parents.
Jeff.
Sure. I needed to take a break after seeing myself talk on the video. I don't like seeing myself talk. It's kind of awful. I would just add that I think our inquiry model that we use that requires us to really get to know our learners quite closely. We develop a really strong trust relationship as a means of being able to actually offer the education that we do in the way that we do. And I think what we found almost by accident was, as a byproduct of that, learners who really needed to feel more comfortable with school are finding that at the root of it, having a really strong relationship with other learners and the teachers who are in the school. That's a really, really big part of it, just that alone, knowing they're really well understood by someone. And when their interests are at the core of their education, it's validating. It helps them feel okay about the things that they're interested in, and just all of that seems to be at the root of people feeling pretty good about themselves after a while.
So I've heard each one of the panelists really talk about what I would call guiding principles of what schools should be doing to prepare our learners for the 21st century. And in the video, we saw that phrase used too, that school structures and schools as places don't seem to be very amenable to the kind of learning and the kind of relationship building that's been described by our panelists so far. So my next question is really, can you reflect a bit on school structures, processes, products, approaches to learning that really need to change if we're going to have the kind of healthy environments where our kids can thrive?
I just want to jump in before you do that. Encourage you guys to speak up a little bit, just because
Okay.
people in the back, and I know you aren't amplified, so we just want to remind you that.
Okay.
Speak up if you can.
So Jeff, maybe you want to start.
Sure, I'll start. Sorry, this is difficult. I think if you look at the sort of the trappings of what we all think school is supposed to look like, this is actually just a little anecdote. We had a boy at our school who's looking at making a movie, and he said, I need to get to a location. I'm making a movie about a high school. I was like, yeah? He said, yeah, but this isn't what high schools look like. I need to go to a place where there's lockers down the walls, and there's closed classroom doors with numbers on them, and there's the halls are empty in between classes, and the bells ring. And it's like, oh, okay. And it was just interesting because it reminded me of all the things that I was trying to eliminate, because they don't have anything to do with learning, and they did have something to do with learning in a particular way at a particular time, when we knew that everybody needed to know a certain number of things that we pretty much had figured out what the world was looking for at the time. So we did that in a very industrial kind of way. You move down the assembly line, you're in grade 7, you're in grade 8, you're in grade 9, you go to English class, you go to math class, the bell rings. That was a system for a different time and for a different reason. So when we're asking teachers to do things like be more inquiry-based, be more modern, be more innovative, that's a pretty cruel thing to ask someone to do when they're operating inside a system and a structure that is really saying you need to do it this way, and if you're going to do it that way, it's going to be a lot harder. You're going to have to work much harder than you would otherwise. So I think the structures can really trap us.
Do we have any?
Sure. I think have any of you gone to a bank or gone up to a counter and the clerk behind the counter is officious and just says no out of habit? It's like their default setting is no. And you just feel so discouraged that you never want to go back there. And then every once in a while, you go to some counter for some reason, and the person behind the counter is helpful, doesn't have that default setting to no, is actually trying to problem solve and help you figure out whatever it is you need help with. What I would say that I find is a difference between a school like Jeff's and other schools is that other schools, there's so many teachers, administrators that have that no default. A child will go up and ask to do something or be interested, and it's like no. No because it doesn't fit in the time slot, no because it's too messy, no because it's going to cost money, some kind of no. And then what happens to kids is that they just kind of shut down. And what we know from the literature, there was an important study funded by the National Institute of Mental Health in the United States that showed that the #1 predictor of student success was engagement. So the engagement of both the student and the teacher. When I've had my patients go to Jeff's school, they don't encounter any no's, they encounter yes. Let's try to make that happen. If you're curious about that, let's figure it out. Let's figure out a way to pay for it. Let's figure out a way to make it work. And instead of getting that sort of sense of discouragement and disconnection, what you have instead is engagement. And I think that having kids engaged in their life, with their friends, with their teachers, is a critical important piece to developing kids that can adapt to the 21st century and be resilient.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh, and I would say that, yeah, that was fabulous. And I think that, again, speaking from a mental health lens, is that those are just what makes the difference. That's kind of the tipping point of, I'll go to school today or I won't go to school today because I have a caring, connected relationship at school, and I have lots of these, you know, I'm treated like, you know, an important human being who has a lot of different information and things inside of them. And so when you're not treated that way, it's really, well, maybe I won't get up today because I really am struggling with my mind. I'll stay in bed and be safe. Yeah.
Alison, do you want to add to that?
Oh, yes. And I, as always, am wondering, where do I start? I started teaching Pro D days about 20 odd years ago, and I called them front-end teaching. And the idea was to find a way to support kids so that we could set them up for success. So very much looking at triggers, as I said earlier, and antecedent management and that kind of thing, and steering away from the competitiveness and the rewards. As a matter of fact, when Paul Aber and I used to do the Island Parent Radio show, we had Daphne McNaughton on, who wrote Recognition Without Rewards. You know, and a false basis for self-esteem is being the best, the prettiest, the fastest. And I've seen many kids who have managed to maintain being that top student up until a certain point when the competition got a little stiffer and they were no longer at the very top, and then they wondered who they were without that letter grade, or again, being the best, the prettiest, the fastest. And just very quickly on a personal note, when my daughter was in grade 6, she wanted to get one of those rewards and, you know, get on the honor roll, and she's more creative like her mother, so I knew there'd be a lot of work involved. And there was the tutor, there was Dad, there was Mom, and we all supported her. And I remember going to the local gym to watch my daughter getting her, you know, award for the honor roll. And first of all, I was worried that she was going to get hooked into this being now her standard and not enjoying the love of learning instead of getting this reward and award. And secondly, as a counselor in the community, I looked at the number of kids on the floor whose families I knew and whose children and kids that I knew that were struggling and that weren't getting called up to the front of the class. And it actually in that moment broke my heart, because I was just looking at the kids and it just seemed like we had the winners and the losers. And there was something about that that really stuck with me. So, just saying.
So that really resonated for me, because some very good friends of mine who have written a book about leadership in educational systems talk about schools being sorting systems instead of learning systems. And what I heard all of you describing was a way of engaging in learning through practices of inquiry in particular. So I think that's where we need to go next, because we've talked a bit about the structures that need to change, and there's a lot of boundaries and borders put around what school, how school is organized, but it's not just how it's organized that puts the constraints on learning. So maybe I'll get Jeff to start us off thinking about inquiry-based learning. How does this fit in? How is that a structure that can replace what's going on in schools now?
Yeah, I think I'm glad you said it that way, because I think some people feel like if they try to describe our school or the inquiry approach in a nutshell, they try to say, oh, just kids do whatever they want and it's like a free-for-all. Well, that's dangerous. That's not a safe space, and that doesn't feel like you're supported or there's enough structure to feel like you know what you're supposed to be doing. So our inquiry-based model comes out of a number of, well, lots and lots of theory, big lit review. I won't bore you with that right now, but it's really about providing enough structure and allowing people to operate in that zone, that it's called the zone of proximal development, but that sweet spot where they're challenged enough but not over challenged, so they're not bored but they're not scared, recognizing that that sweet spot is moving all the time. It's different for different people. Some people are in a really nice spot to do a certain thing in the morning but not in the afternoon, so the flexibility to allow people to co-construct is what we call it, co-construct a learning path that allows them to inquire about things that are important to them is really the heart of the structure that we use in the inquiry process. Then it's building in really strong assessment practices at the front end. So we say, when you're interested in this topic or this idea, what are you trying to learn, and what's your goal? And then that's what we assess. It's pretty simple. And for a lot of kids, they've never ever done that before. They have no idea how they're being assessed or who's doing that or what the point of it is. And so this is a real first for most of our kids, most of our teachers too.
Cool. So this idea of assessment practices and co-construction of a learning path, are there some of our other panelists who'd like to talk about the values or the approach that creates with learners so they can feel that kind of success?
Yeah, I think that when any child is involved in what they want to learn, and having a supportive teacher, with that teacher, I'm assuming they'll be well structured, and they will have a relationship that is built on trust, and it's built on kind of a partnership on how to get the learning outcome or the learning to happen. And I think that's really important, because there are a lot of kids that I can think of that have, you know, they're really opposed to doing things that they don't want to do. They're already stressed out and things like that. So doing something with a partner, being the teacher, and planning it collaboratively is, I think, really going to help kids to be invested and more responsible in what they're going to want to learn. And I think they'll show up a lot more for that. Yeah, I really do.
Cool, thank you. How about you, Alison?
Sure. This is a little bit of a twist and a bit sideways, but I remember doing a Pro D Day where I was introducing the idea of coaching kids. And I love the idea of pulling out what they know to be true for them, instead of us constantly telling kids what to do and making decisions for them. My pet peeve is hearing, "You're making bad choices right now." I just think, you know, don't say that. I mean, here's a kid just trying to make a choice, let alone having the choices judged. So anyway, so I went into this Pro D Day, and I used to be looked at like I was green with three heads. I mean, really, the stuff that I was talking about. And so someone said to me, one of the teachers, it was a high school, he said, "How do we get kids to do their homework?" And I said, "I don't know." And all the teachers looked at me like, and I said, "But you know, you've been teaching for how many years?" He said, "Well, 30. And I said, "Well, there you go." So I started coaching him. And I started asking questions and asking that great question, what else works? What else works? And it became really funny, because after a few minutes, we had this huge list of answers to his question. And for me, it was saying, you've got the answer in you. I'm not that smart. And, you know, seeing kids, that's absolutely huge. Yeah.
So you've all described what I would call a young person who could deeply love learning, in terms of the way in which they could make school a place for themselves to engage deeply in learning. And given that youth spend the most of their growing years in school, what's one other thing that you haven't talked about yet from your experience that would really help those young people develop and maintain a love for learning?
I would say agency. When children feel like they have the power to affect change in their life, to affect change in the world, they're experiencing agency. And when we watch the news of all the amazing activists coming out of Parkland, it's incredible. It's awe-inspiring. What you're seeing is young people realizing their agency, and we can do things right from the beginning of development to ensure that children are developing agency. So giving them choices, validating their choices, helping them to see themselves as being in charge of something, being empowered. These are ways that we create little leaders. Inquiry-based schools like Jeff's are all about agency, and in creating that agency, fostering that agency, amplifying that agency in the child. So every interaction with the teacher and the child is about really basically instilling a sense of agency in the child. So what's going to happen, fast forward into your 20s, is you're not going to be like a lamb following along. You're going to be someone who's going to be able to make decisions, be a leader, think about what's going to happen next. And that is critical in this new world that we're living in.
Thank you. So we've heard about agency, trust, partnership, collaboration, developing responsibility for learning. Can we add to the list? What else? Jeff.
Sure. Oh, you stole mine, agency. Thanks a lot. Sorry, she's doctor. I would just add to that connection, and I think the two are really related. We've got a lot of kids at the school who have found a way to connect with their community, the greater community, outside the walls of the school. A lot of times schools think you have to do everything inside the school. We can't, for one thing, but we also don't want to. We're tempted sometimes, oh, we should just add this to the school. It's like, no, that's already in the community. Let's go use the one in the community, so that you're forced to connect with people. And what we're finding is with adolescents, they love to, once they've done it, they're terrified to do it because they don't get a chance to do it very much. But when we help engineer a connection to the greater world out there, they realize they're actually a part of it and they can be a part of it. Went to a Royals game the other night, the one they lost sadly, but played well. But one of our kids there, he's in grade 10 and he's operating the corner camera, and I didn't even know he was doing that, and it was out of a connection we made with him actually at the summit last year, and he's down in the corner and he's filming the game. He's doing all the Royals games for the playoffs. So so he's 15 and he's excellent, and he's working in there with the pros. So he's now connected to the world.
Cool. Okay, so we've got agency, experience, choices, empowerment, trust, partnership, collaboration, and what was your last one? Community, connection and community. And you've gone to my favorite point, is beyond the classroom walls, that this idea that somehow learning only happens in classrooms, formal settings where trained teachers teach students particular content in order to learn. And I think we've heard from the panel here, and I'm sure many of you would add to that definition, that learning is much more than that. Much, much more than that, and it has to go beyond the classroom walls. In fact, Jeff didn't talk enough about the work he used to do at his old school district, where he had, and it builds on what Alison was talking about coaching, because he developed a coaching mentorship relationship with members of the community who would come into the school and students who would go out to the school. So I'm sure you're probably still doing that, aren't you?
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. Sounded like you were. Okay, so is there anything else that we should add to this list about love of learning?
Well, once again, I have something else to say. But the thing that is really heartwarming to me is when kids can have a life that's big outside of school. Like working with families whose kids have actually struggled in school and had a really tough time. I think it's sad that they have to come home and then struggle more doing homework, having power struggles in the family, doing homework. I don't think parents make great teachers. And I just have to say, one of my pet peeves too is kids being overstructured in their spare time in competitive sports at very young ages, when in fact they could be volunteering at a bicycle shop because they love the smell of bicycles, or just doing something that they absolutely love, as you said, in the community. And yeah, so that's my 2 cents on that. A life outside of school that's big.
Can I add?
Yeah, absolutely.
I'd love to add. I would add to agency, moral agency. So there's 2 quotes that I love. They're from Pinterest. I love them. The first one, yeah, I've loved Pinterest. I've had actually my graduate students create Pinterest boards for extra credit, so where we all share our best teaching ideas, and it's worked actually really well. But the 2 quotes that I love are, one is, integrity matters and happens even when no one is watching, right? So So for children to grow up with this sense of what is right and what is wrong, and that happens online when nobody sees, nobody knows it's you that posted that or trolled or did whatever. But what matters is who you are all the time, no matter who is noticing and who is not. I think that's critically important. And another one is you never look down on someone unless you're helping them up, right? So this idea that our job as a global community is to elevate each one of us. If each one of us is doing better, then we're going to be a more harmonious, prosperous, innovative society. So moral agency, making sure that our children see part of their job moving forward to help the world, to help their community, and to do what's really important to them.
Yeah. Very nice. Okay, so I see a hand in the audience, and I think we better stop and take that question. So I'm going to pass this microphone to you, because apparently if we don't use the microphone, we get in really big trouble. Oh, is someone coming with a microphone? No.
Hi. I have a grade 1 who's already disillusioned with school. I do a lot of homeschooling with him, although he does go to school in the mornings. And I'm just curious, Alison, because you said you don't think that parents make good teachers. It kind of crushed me a bit there, honey. So I'm wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Let me say, I, as a parent, didn't make a good teacher. How about that? The homeschooling, I love the model of homeschooling. So I'm sure that you're doing a great job of teaching. I guess one of the things, though, is you know, it does take time and a certain understanding of how kids can learn. And my point was more around, you know, busy parents that are trying to help their kids with homework at night, and just the pressure that families feel, you know, getting their kids to do homework. And that's what I was talking about as a context there. Yeah.
I thought so. Just wanted to check.
Well, thank you for the intervention. That was important. Okay, so there is another topic that I think we need to spend a little more time on before we open up to the audience for some more questions. But one of the questions, because of the expertise of our panel, I think it's really important to talk about some of the challenges that our learners face in schools. So what about ways in which a more open school environment might help youth with anxiety, ADHD, or depression? These are some of the reasons why our kids are forced out of school or drop out of school. So what things could you offer us to think about in the context of a different kind of school experience to address those challenges for some of our youth?
I think that kids that are on the mental health spectrum in some way, and even if they're not, they really, it comes down to two main things. It comes down to, again, the connection that they will have with their teachers, with the other students in an inquiry-based system. I think that kind of connection makes all the difference. Working in a small group with a common goal, common learning goal, I think that's beautiful, because they have responsibility, they have other people that they are in this with. So I think it's very, very protective for them. And again, I think the most important thing is the relationships. And I think the relationships and how the teachers and the student will relate to one another is so important, because that builds partnership and in the learning. And that really makes a huge difference in a lot of the kids that I look after and speak to. Yeah.
Do you want to give that one a go as well, Alison? No? No?
I might give that a go. I completely agree. And I think one of the things that I notice with children who experience mental health challenges, and like Lisa, I work with this every day, I deal with these challenges every day, is hope. So I find a lot of children just don't feel hope. And without that sense of hope, they shut down. And I'll give you an example. I don't know how many of you took Psych 100 at some point along the way? Yeah, like everybody. Do you remember Martin Seligman and the dog experiment, the learned helplessness experiment? And it's so interesting to see where Martin is now as the leader of positive psychology, but at the beginning, at the beginning of his career in the 70s, he was famous for coining the phrase learned helplessness. So what learned helplessness, where that came from, was a study where he put, it's terrible, but I almost didn't become a psychologist because of this study, is that he had a dog in a pen, in a big pen that was electrified underneath. And so a dog would stand somewhere and then get a jolt, and so would walk and go somewhere else and get a jolt. And eventually, no matter where the dog went, the dog would get a jolt. So the dog lost hope and developed learned helplessness, and as a result, the dog would just lay down on the floor and be jolted, right? And that was what it's like for learned helplessness for a child. If a child doesn't feel like there's any hope, there's any point, they just go to bed and stay in bed, or they medicate themselves with drugs and alcohol, or they immerse themselves into 24 hours online or something, an escape from that pain of feeling like there's no hope. What we need to do is we need to make sure our children feel hope. We need to make sure that they feel there's meaning and purpose in their day at school, that their relationships and connections matter, and that they can look to the future with a sense of optimism and hope. That's what we need to do, and that's really what this is about, and that's why mental health is affected by schools that give hope versus schools that don't give hope.
Thank you.
I had one
yes.
thing too. I wanted to say that on a day-to-day basis too, I think on days they accumulate into bigger things like hope. I think it's important that we look at the work about self-regulation and you can ask people to consider self-regulation, but unless you give them an opportunity and an environment in which they can practice self-regulation, it's pretty cruel to teach people about it. Again, I think it's important to have an environment where not only are all these things we've been talking about, the relationships and the kind of learning, but also the physical environment where you're not forced to be in a group all the time or by yourself all the time or understimulated or overstimulated. You have an opportunity to choose what your day looks like to the degree that is possible, and that's something we are very happy that we've done, and we're continually improving that as we learn more about how to do that and what's actually working. But we know from our learners that that's one of the things that most of them reference when they talk about the difference between being in our school and schools they've been in before, is that they can actually say, today I really needed to be in a room with no distractions with my headphones on reading, but yesterday I really needed to be with a small group of people talking about my ideas and what I was working on. But neither of those things would have worked on the other days.
Right. It's so interesting, that example. The idea of self-regulation, I think, is a really powerful one, and it might be one that our panelists want to talk a little bit about this idea of self-regulation and its relationship to hope and the ability to have agency. I think these are all interrelated terms. But the other thing that I have on my list that I want to talk briefly about is the whole notion of self-esteem, because I think these are all interrelated terms as well. So maybe our panelists want to jump in on one of those strands and add to this conversation.
Sure. I decided to do a project asking various professionals what self-regulation actually meant to them, what affected kids in a way that created stress for them. And we did this project over the period of a couple of years, and I interviewed again psychologists and teachers, and then I asked them to tell me what's best practices, what really works for kids to support them. Anyway, to make it short, at the end of the day, it boiled back down to relationship. It boiled down to the fact that the needs of a child may change moment to moment, let alone day to day. And I guess I'm left to think about Ross Greene's work and his famous line, if the child could, he would. And having heart with kids, not looking at them as behavioral problems. And to just really, to really support them, because self-regulation, I just think the strategies are different for each child, and again, changing so much. So going beyond behavior problems, yeah.
Lisa.
Yeah, I love the idea about the self-regulation, but I also want to talk about the self-confidence. And I think that is huge, because if a child, all children have strengths and different ways of learning, but if kids have mental illness, or if they have, learning disability, then it's even more, it's showing up all the time. And so to sit there and not learn the way, you have to learn the way everybody else is learning, that is just so disheartening for these children. So learning from their strengths and how they can learn best, and the ways that they want to learn and what they want to learn, is going to be, I think, that just boosts their confidence.
I really like what you say about a strength-based approach, because I think that does build confidence, self-confidence, a sense of agency and purpose. Yes, so thank you for that. Anyone else want to jump in on the question of self-regulation or?
Well, I really agreed everything with what you said, Alison. There's no question that how we see a child and how we frame their challenges affects how we interact with them. So one thing that I think about when a child is struggling is, rather than think that they're having a hard time, that they're giving you a hard time, think that they're having a hard time, right? The child is having a hard time. They're not trying to give you a hard time, is really the way to think about that. And that's exactly the point. When you can work together with your child constructively to make sure that they can get over their hard times, and that you're a partner on that journey of getting over those hard times, that's really where that relationship comes in, and that's really that first step towards emotional and behavioral regulation.
Just add one quick thing, and again, agreeing with everything that's said, that someone mentioned before about sorting and sifting people in the school system, I think it was you, Catherine, that when you get away from everyone doing the same thing in the same way at the same time, all of a sudden there's a little bit of an implementation dip we found where our kids go, oh, that's really interesting, and they're all kind of doing their own thing, and then all of a sudden they have this real panic moment when they're new to the school, and it's about middle of October, and they get really scared because they can't use comparative metrics anymore. And then one day someone will come in and say, my cousin in Nanaimo in grade 10 is doing this in science and we're not. Are we going to graduate? I was like, yes, you are. They're not doing quantum mechanics and you are. After they get through that little scare, they stop. They get away from the comparative metrics and they start to go to that sort of like that personal best model. Like, what was I trying to achieve? What were my goals? How did I move towards my goals? What challenges did I face? Do I need to re-engineer something to be able to reach my goal? Do I have a new goal? Should I dump that? And just the way they look at their learning changes completely. It's not just a lockstep thing where you look beside and you can say, oh, someone's ahead of me or someone's behind me. That's irrelevant. That doesn't even matter anymore.
Well, you might think it's irrelevant, Jeff, but I'm going to challenge you on this front, because I work in the post-secondary system, and I can tell you that I don't know how you're going to move away from this comparative metrics, because in the university system, we want comparators. We want to know who's the best, the fastest, the highest GPA. So maybe you could address the question of, so what about other systems that may not have the same values, goals, or beliefs about achievement, and moving away from a comparative matrix?
Maybe I'll just jump in with right away. So just two things I wanted to say on that. One is I'm seeing more and more of our kids contemplating institutional bypass, which is, if the university measures things like that, I'm not that interested. I could probably go learn this a different way. But I'm also seeing kids interested in going in and kind of brokering arrangements. And so one of our grads this year, he met some people at Camosun and they've been really supportive, really, really supportive. One of them's even here tonight. And he's trying to put three things together that don't usually go together: a sports thing, a business thing, and a AI thing. And he has an idea about how they all fit together. Artificial intelligence, not artificial insemination. And he thought I should just be clear. Yeah, he's not a cat. But one of the questions that came up when we were talking with someone at the college about this was sort of the credit problem. And he goes, oh, I don't care about that. I'm just trying to learn this. and then I'm good. I don't care. And so it was a little bit of a, like, it's strange because the college has to care because they get measured that way, and they get measured on completion of programs and all sorts of things, but the clients are caring less. So I think the institutions are going to have to change.
Yeah. Anybody else want to weigh in?
Well, I'm just wondering, you know, you mentioned self-esteem. And when I think about self-esteem, it's having a sense of who you are, what you like, what you don't like. You know, it's being able to fail and recover from failure. You know, and just that sense of trying again and, you know, developing the human beingness in you versus the human doingness. You know, when I talk about self-esteem with parenting, the pitfalls are having to be good, perfectionism, again, being the best, but to really nurture self-esteem is to be able to say, I accept you as you are. I want to affirm your thoughts, ideas, your interests, your feelings, and affection, which isn't just physical, but it's a sense of, I am so happy to see you. Yeah. I am just happy to see you. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's nice. Yeah. There's another concept that's closely allied with self-esteem, and that's self-efficacy. And sometimes, and not the way that you've described self-esteem. The way that you've described self-esteem is how I hope children experience. But sometimes self-esteem in terms of am I pretty, am I the fastest, is using extrinsic motivation. So you're motivated by things outside of yourself. And so really the control, the locus of control is that other person, system, whatever. Another concept to think about then is self-efficacy, and that's that belief inside of your head that you can do something, connected to agency, but it's this idea that when something gets hard, you're going to persist. When something is inflexible, you're going to be flexible. You're going to overcome those obstacles in front of you. We know that children who have strong self-efficacy, and this is coming from the work of Emmy Werner and the mother of resilience theory, when children have self-efficacy, they're much better able to be problem solvers and adapt to the world ahead of them. And that's what inquiry-based learning is really doing, is shifting that motivation from extrinsic motivation to someone else to that locus of control being internal, so you're internally motivated. It's intrinsic motivation, and it's a much stronger and much more powerful way to be motivated over time.
Thank you. So we've heard quite a bit from our panel, and they've offered us some very profound and thoughtful ways of imagining what schools could be like and the kind of principles and approaches we want our schools and our teachers to have. Inquiry-based learning has been a big part of it, but it's also been a lot around agency, self-efficacy, self-esteem, relationships, and connectivity. So I think we've heard from the panel about some of the principles we want to be a part of any school that we put our kids into and that we participate in as a learning community together. But I'm sure there's some questions that people have in the audience. So we've reached that point where there might be someone out there. Oh, I see a hand waving way at the back. So how are we going to handle the microphone situation for questions? Do we? Okay. All right. And then this lovely young woman at the back would like to go first, if that's okay, because she caught my eye first. Okay. All right.
Catherine, the live stream's been active and people have been asking questions. So I'm going to start with one of the ones that have been voted the most to be asked, which is, what are the barriers to a provincial-wide adoption of this philosophy and these practices?
Okay, there are very few, but they're big ones. Really, right now, one of the reasons why we opened a high school was that we felt most of the barriers were there, and we wanted to try to break those down, because you can do this right now in an elementary school, no problem. And in fact, most elementary educators, this is where they want to be anyway. But often they say, oh, I can't do that because when they get to grade 6, it's gonna be like this. So I have to get them ready for grade 6. And in grade 6, they say, oh, when they get to grade 9, it's gonna have to be like this. So I got to get them ready. So it kind of pushes back down the system. All we know that really needs to change is how you graduate. If people didn't graduate with marks in courses, and they graduated with actually in a competency-based system, we're sort of using that language right now, but that's not really what we're doing right now. That would pretty much do it. And if we could get away from the comparative metrics, I think that also would do it. Right now, there's one thing. It's the ministerial order called the graduation program order. And if that changed, pretty much everything else would change. And we're working on that. Yeah.
So there is progress being made.
Yes, there is progress.
Another question comes in from Sarah, and it says, does this approach work well for kids with ADHD who struggle in traditional school systems but are so smart and capable when they are interested in the topic? Or do they tend to fall off due to not being able to organize tasks, get started, and the executive functioning deficits?
Well, I would jump in there. I think that if you made sure that the child with ADHD had the right support and structure in place by that caring team around them, that would help teach those executive functions to be able to understand what next needs to happen in order to complete a task, then that's like the absolute perfect learning situation for a person with ADHD. I think the worry would be is that it was open-ended but there was no support or structure. I think that you need to kind of reshape how you think about learning to understand that it can be open-ended and it can also have structure and support.
And if I could just add that with that structure and support, and again, self-esteem being nurtured, that kids are motivated by the hope of success versus the fear of failure.
Yes, exactly.
You know.
Good point.
Yeah. Okay.
Hi. The question I had, and I mean, I kind of already know the answer, but I think it's good to be addressed, is how well does inquiry-based learning address issues of diversity and inclusion?
Did everyone hear that? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Good. Yeah. So who wants to start off? Okay. So to what extent does inquiry-based learning support diversity and inclusion? Did I get that right? Yeah. Good.
I'll start. I'm sure there's going to be better answers. I'm just going to say, and I'm prejudiced because I run an inquiry-based school, but I actually, personally, I think it's the only way to do this, to do those two things. And what I found is that when people are able to set their own goals, work collaboratively and independently, and or depending on what they need, we're developing relationships, learning structures to whatever kind of structures they might need to support them in the ways they need to be supported, as opposed to, this is the structure we're using today, everyone's going to use this structure. That one size fits all doesn't really support diversity and inclusion. And so, in my opinion, true inclusion isn't about adapting things so someone can do the same thing as everyone else. It's about letting people do the things that are important to them and supporting them to do it. So everybody in our school has basically an IEP. They're all doing really different things from everyone else. So there isn't any norm that anyone's comparing themselves to. They're doing the thing that's important to them, and we support people to do it. So I guess that's the answer to the question. That's my answer anyway.
And when I think about families, I think about the idea that you get to be who you are, unique, be yourself, and be loved and accepted as part of a healthy family. Yeah.
I just want to say what's actually happening is we're taking out the element of competitiveness, and that's what actually allows for the inclusion, right, and the diversity, because it's not pitting one person against the other. Sorry, that really felt important for me.
That's a very powerful observation. Thank you for sharing that. I think there's someone else there at the back, and then here.
Thanks. Hi. How is this different from the International Baccalaureate Inquiry Program? I've only taught the PYP, the younger years. I'm not that familiar with the middle and high school years. I assume it's probably a lot more structured than the inquiry you're talking about, but could you just compare those? Because people ask me that, and when I talk about your school, and I don't know enough to compare the two.
Sure. I mean, there's certainly elements in the IB program that we would come across and that our learners are coming across, particularly some of the interdisciplinary aspects. And I used to teach TOK, Theory of Knowledge in IB, so I kind of know it at the high school level. But what's different is that the outcomes aren't preset, and so it's interdisciplinary, but it is absolutely open-ended inquiry. So there would never be, this is a thing you have to cover. That never happens. There is some of that in our BC curriculum, but generally we find that to be pretty easy to kind of blow past, because it's kind of pretty low-level stuff. So in terms of depth, and so I guess the difference would just be that it's much more personalizable than that. I think that some of our learners would find themselves doing some of the things they might do in an IB program at a high school level, but not probably in the way that they do it. Including things like how long they need to spend on things, formats of writing. Like there's no prescription about how many hours you must do X or Y like there is in IB. And IB's changed a lot too. It's now that it's, the College Board owns it and it's more of a IB registered trademark, it's really quite different from what it used to be. So I think we're even more different from IB now than what IB was like 15 years ago.
I actually went to an IB high school. I graduated, not with my full IB, but with IB in a couple of subjects. And there were lots of examinations, like lots and lots and lots of homework and lots of examinations. So on the one hand, it prepared me really well for university, the way that university is currently structured. But if we're thinking about rethinking education, I think we're moving more towards that Finnish model, where there's very few standardized tests. And less like the American model, where there's still lots and lots of standardized tests. So just like sort of one lens, I think the hoops that you jump are different. Yeah.
This has been amazing. I love it. I'm just curious, how does the way we train teachers, does that have to change at all?
Well, both Catherine and I teach in the teacher education program.
And the easy answer is yes.
Yeah. But it's hard, man. It's hard to get big places to change and to think about things differently. It's really, really, really hard. Yeah, so big institutional structures are hard to work inside sometimes.
Even things like the approval systems that we have from government. So they license universities to offer teacher education programs, and there are tons of rules around what's allowable as a course subject area and what's not. And so a lot of those kind of regulations also get in the way, not the least of which is kind of the institutional barriers we put in place. But we have so many systems that try and regulate these things. I think the ministry is looking at some new models, and Jeff might want to talk about something. Yeah, are you doing something cool with teacher education at your school, Jeff?
I don't know.
Yeah, he kind of is. So.
I am?
Yeah. Just the students that you bring. Just talk a little bit about what happens when you bring our students to your school.
Oh yeah, well we certainly have a lot of visitors, which is great, from UVic and other institutions as well. I think people, at first I wasn't sure if it was like a visit to the zoo kind of thing, oh, isn't that interesting? I've never seen one of those before. But it's a little bit, for many of them, it's sort of like, because all people are learning to be teachers. They know all this stuff in theory. There's nothing that we're doing that's really any different from what you're taught in your psychology classes and adolescent psychology and the root of assessment and all of these things. But they don't think they're going to be able to do it. And then they come in and they go, oh, you really can. And they get very excited, and so that's one thing that we've really noticed. And then a lot of them come back. So after they visited as a group, we see most of them again, and they come back to sort of get another look or come to volunteer to do something or just be a fly on the wall for a little while. So that is nice. Right now, I don't think we're able to be a full practicum placement for somebody because we're too alternative, I think is the term that's used. So, and I understand that in the sense that if you were coming to us and learning to be a teacher and thought you would be able to then go and do that somewhere else, you wouldn't probably. Although I would argue that if you took those skill sets with you to another place, they would be very transferable, but there definitely is a different culture.
So what Jeff makes reference to is another one of the rules that there are about what pre-service teachers are allowed to do and where they're allowed to teach. And there's a lot of regulation, and that's one of the reasons why they can't do their full experience in places like Jeff's classroom, even though we know that those are richer, better, mentored learning environments than in many other places. But there's one thing I want to put on the plate, and it's something we're trying to work on at UVic, is I'm not sure what you know about the people who typically go into teacher education, but the demographics of those people who go into teacher education tend to be students who themselves were very comfortable and successful in the current system. And so they come in with a mindset that's already convinced that the current system works well. So there's that self-reinforcing system, and people like Jillian and I are trying to switch that up and problematize people's thinking on that front. Now, I don't want to give you the impression that everyone's like that. I did a study a few years ago, and we saw about 25% of the students who are coming into programs now have a much broader conception of education. They're much more interested in community-based approaches, and they really do challenge the system. So there are students, and places like UVic are identifying those students and inviting them and encouraging them to become a part of a system so we can build the kind of successful, inclusive environments we want our students to experience. Yeah, way to go, UVic. We're doing something really well.
Yeah.
So there's another question right here.
I homeschool my daughter. She's in middle school. I took her out of the public school system because she's extremely dyslexic and it wasn't working out for her. And one of the things, I pulled her early enough, so I pulled her in grade 7, and I pulled her early enough that I watched something happen that didn't get to happen for my oldest daughter who went through traditional school. And one of the things I saw happen was that I'm also a teacher, so I felt comfortable teaching my child at home and doing a good job of it, I must say. But in fact, it got ridiculous, so I've had to create programs so that other kids could join, because there's so many projects to do, that you can't do with one kid, right? Yeah, and anyways, so one thing I saw was that I had created this space in my daughter's life for her to take a breath and to actually get a chance to discover what her personality was and to discover what her passions were, something I don't think she would have been able to do in school, because what I saw with my older daughter was that she was forced to conform as soon as she got into high school. And she went into high school, she had a horrible year, and she decided to remake herself to fit the image that she needed to fit to be successful in school. But my youngest, she didn't have to do that because she was protected. And I know that, so my question is, now that my daughter is going into grade 10, which is, I can teach grade 10. I could teach grade 11, 12 if I had to, but can I teach physics? No. So the question is, because I've looked at your school, and I think it's fascinating, and I'm already doing the inquiry approach with my projects, but it's not necessarily accessible for people who aren't in a higher tax bracket than me, being a homeschooling teacher who doesn't work in a school, right, and get paid lots of money. So how are you making your school more accessible to people who actually need it? And also, you're based in Victoria, and because I guess the question for me is, I heard something about a module so that people could do this in their own communities, and I'd like it if you would maybe explain that a little bit.
I might start, and then I might hand it over to Tom here. But just so you know, our purpose was never to. We're not the answer. We're trying to demonstrate some things that I didn't feel I could demonstrate in the position that I was as a superintendent in a school district, particularly the school district I was in. They were a wonderful district. They were very small, and if I wanted to re-engineer a high school there, it would be the high school, and I thought that would be kind of unethical and not very nice to force everybody to change their lives just because I wanted to, so I left. But I wasn't intending to do this, like our real business plan is to put ourselves out of business. We would like nothing more than for things to change in such a way that the public education system is doing what we're doing really well. We help so many people. We have hundreds of teachers who are connected with us all over the world, but especially all over the province. We give our stuff away. We're on the phone all the time. At night, that's pretty much all I do is email and call people every night. And we're trying desperately to get people to do what we're doing so that it can be accessible for everyone. We know we're not accessible to everyone. We've tried to keep it as accessible as possible, but operating as an independent school, we're not funded that way. So you're right, it's not something that everybody can access. As we're getting more established, we hope to be able to make that more possible for more people. I've almost paid back my loan to myself on my mortgage on my house, and then we'll be able to start to build some scholarship funds and things like that, which I'm really excited about, but that's not really the answer. The answer is many more schools that are doing this, not just making one school accessible. So, yeah.
I'm just going to say something to that as well, because it certainly is why we're doing what we're doing, and opening a school, as Jeff could tell you, is never about making money, and it's certainly something I've experienced. Everything that Jeff just said, and tenfold, is this man doesn't sleep because he spends all of his time talking to the ministry, talking to teachers, talking to parents, and really spreading this model as far and wide as he can get it in as many ways as possible, and sharing every detail of what it is that he's done and how he's done it, in order to make it accessible to people. So for people like us to come along and say, you know, what would this look like to open another middle school? What would it look like to make this accessible to people? What would it look like to expand this and scale this so that other people in other communities could open more schools like this? It certainly isn't about making money. It has to be sustainable in order to work. But our goal is, and always has been, much the same as Jeff's, is to put ourselves out of business and make this model as accessible as possible to as many people as possible. So certainly through the nonprofit that we have started, which is ReThink Thinking, our intention is to be able to provide as many bursaries as possible, to be able to, the crowdfund isn't just about opening the school, it's about being able to provide bursaries to students who wouldn't otherwise be able to attend. It's about raising money in many different ways, whether it's through sponsorships or donations or foundation money. Our goal is to be able to do this on a larger scale so that we can help more kids and make sure it's more accessible to all demographics. And remove those financial barriers for people. But until, and certainly this is the conversation we've had with Jeff many times over, until we get to a space where more and more of these schools exist and we reach a bit of a critical mass, we're not going to be able to put ourselves out of business. Jeff won't be able to put himself out of business. We won't be able to put ourselves out of business. We really need to create more and more and more of these schools and make them as accessible as possible in order to push that change further and faster and harder, and that's why we exist, and we hope to support Jeff in that, because he is only one man, and I have never seen a man work so hard to make something real in the world. So kudos to him for that.
So I'm looking at the clock and wondering how we're doing. Yeah? Okay, so can I ask the panelists to do one last thing? Okay, so I want the panelists to do one last thing. I want them to give all of us some advice about where this new school should go. If you were going to give the startup team, Rebecca and Tom, and others who are in the audience, some advice, if you were to give them just one piece of advice about what they should, or maybe it's a shouldn't, but maybe a should, what would you put on your list? So take a moment just to... We have 5 minutes left, so people can take no more than a minute to answer the question, what piece of advice would you give this new startup?
So where would they go, just in terms of approach?
Yeah, and the approach that they're going to use, an approach they might use with parents, with students, a principle you'd want to include, you'd want to make sure was at the core of the work you were doing with the students. If there was only one principle that you used in working with students, what would that be?
Well, I'll jump in, and my answer might be obvious, but I go back to communication, that everybody learn to communicate in non-aggressive ways effectively. And I think that's a big part of conflict resolution, because if you know how to listen effectively and speak safely, you create emotional safety for the kids. And from that place, that's where problem solving can really occur.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Lisa. And to build on that, when you are assuming good intentions, I think that helps build relationships, because sometimes we might misunderstand how someone is coming across to us. So I think that in going with the relationship is a good place to start. So.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Jillian. I would say focus on teaching the whole child. So, and that's a bit of a motherhood statement, but it is really critical. So you're nurturing their heart as you're nurturing their mind, and helping them be the very best that they can be, so reaching their own personal potential.
Jeff, last word.
I guess I didn't talk about this before, but we have a sort of a silent curriculum that's underneath our competency-based curriculum, which is about things like who am I when I'm by myself? Who am I when I'm with other people? How do I make difficult ethical decisions? Things like that. And I think that's probably the most important thing that we actually do. It's not measured in any way. It's not measured on our inspections. It's not measured in on your grad transcript. But I think it's actually what I feel the best about with what our kids are actually learning at the school. And I guess I would just add to that, figure out what the non-negotiables are and hang on to those very tightly, and don't let anybody tell you that you're being undemocratic or you're not involving the community. There are some things that are really important that cannot change, and then there's a lot of other things that can change quite a bit. So try not to mess with the really important stuff.
So I'd like to thank the panelists for their presentation and their time this evening.
Yes, thank you all. I know there's another mic around here somewhere. It's just. Oh, there. Give me that. No, that's okay. That's okay. I'll use this one. Okay. Thank you, John. So thanks everybody for coming tonight. I think we're actually wrapping on time, so we're really excited about that. And thank you to all the panelists, because it really is you guys who are the experts, and it's really our job to help spread your knowledge and expertise out into the world so that we can all do better for our kids, and that's really what this is all about. So for everyone who's out there, I believe Jason's pressing go on the campaign right now. So it's rethinkschool.ca. It's going to be live right now. If you're inspired by tonight and want to get involved, the key ways you can get involved are go check out the campaign page. If you're a parent and you want to come to an information session, you can find out that on the campaign page as well. And if you want to become an ally of this and support in any way, please get in touch. We have an allies page as well through the campaign page. So rethinkschool.ca, please join us and help out in any way you can. And we'd love to answer your questions. And thanks for being here. We got about 15 minutes, I think, in the room. So if you guys want to mingle and ask questions of anyone who's here, the panelists or any of us, please do. And thank you so much to all the live stream people for joining us. And yeah, cheers for them. Thanks, everybody.
As parents, there are two things we want for our children above all else. First, we want them to be well, happy, fulfilled, and generally excited about life. Second, we want them to be able to be well-positioned and well-adjusted to navigate our ever-evolving world. So, every day we put millions of young people onto buses like this one, bound for buildings filled with desks and chairs where bells govern a tight schedule. Here, they will listen to teachers and write tests to satisfy a government curriculum that still measures the same sorts of skills as it did in the 1800s. The world is changing at a pace that few of us can predict, but that all of us can feel. For those of us who are parents, this often results in anxiety and concern, knowing we are sending our children into the future to work jobs that haven't yet been invented, for organizations that don't yet exist. Thought leaders from around the world are devising new models of education to better prepare children for the future and to foster their unique talents. One effective model that's quickly rising to the surface allows for students to explore what matters to them and to learn in a personalized fashion.
Hi, I'm Rebecca, and this is Tom, and we're ReThink Thinking. As parents ourselves, we share many of the same concerns that you do, which is why we're asking for your support in raising $220,000 to launch the next leading-edge middle school right here in Victoria, BC this fall.
And while we're at it, a completely modular system so that we can support others doing the same in their own communities. The education model that we're so excited about is called Inquiry Learning.
What's different about the inquiry model is that we go beyond just the research project with a presentation at the end. We're actually taking people through very deeper learning activities to get at the heart of why they're passionate about a topic or an area of interest, and they discover or create their own knowledge.
The inquiry-based education model focuses on strengths, not weaknesses, competencies, not curriculum, and personal growth, not test scores. There are no teachers and no students, only learners.
I feel very confident about our daughter's future. She's really learning how to develop as a human being, and she's learning about things that really interest her.
My daughter has thrived in the community she belongs to now. She's allowed to be fully herself.
Well, inquiry learning means I have the freedom to work on what I want. I'm still completing the curriculum, but it also means I can go more in depth in some subjects.
It's a great learning environment. And the inquiry model specifically is you do what you love what you do. You do projects and inquiries on whatever your interest is. And in many cases, that leads people to their future jobs.
I personally didn't really get anything done in the public school education system. And I found that being here, I really sort of found this motivation that I didn't really know I had.
The inquiry learning model sees students graduating high school with the same accreditation they would receive at any other school, and more importantly, with pivotal 21st century competencies like fluid communication skills, initiative, confidence, and a clear sense of purpose.
I feel like what we're doing is the perfect way to prepare people for a world that we really don't know how it's going to unfold next. We would rather have people learning how to think, how to analyze a situation and make a decision, rather than learning a recipe using ingredients that might not exist in 5 years or 10 years.
If you're curious and want to know more, we're holding frequent parent information sessions. And for details, check out the links below.
I hope we've conveyed why we're so committed to expanding inquiry learning and that you're as excited about this new school as we are. Thank you for your interest in our vision and for joining us as we rethink thinking.